Welcome to the Brothers Random Show. My name is Travis.
And I'm Michael.
We are two ordinary brothers discussing extraordinary ideas and some random shit. So the topics on this show are going to vary from theology, politics, masculinity, movies, philosophy, books, pop culture, and many, many other subjects. We will be talking about people we admire and learn from, and the wisdom that they share, riding on the coattails of giants, as it were, with people such as Ben Shapiro, Thomas Sowell, Matt Walsh, Megan Kelly, Chris Williamson of Modern Wisdom, Joe Rogan, Candace Owens, Tim Pool, Larry Elder, Gary Vanderchuk, Barry Weiss, Mike Rowe, basically everybody over at the Daily Wire Plus, and especially from Dr. Jordan B. Peterson, who we believe is the sage of our time. Michael, why are we here?
Well, today we wanted to talk about our kind of evolution in some of our religious thinking that was brought about by Jordan Peterson. So we both, in mentioning that we both grew up polygamist in a polygamous cult, and starting to come out of that cult light. Sure. So it was a cult, but yeah.
Diet cult. It's diet cult. It's not what everybody thinks it is.
It wasn't keep, sweet, pray, and obey. It
wasn't that quite. Bad.
Wasn't quite like that. But so coming out of that, kind of, there's a tendency when people have a bad religious experience with their religion that they will, in a sense, I guess, throw the baby out with the bathwater. Well, it's all garbage, right? And then just get rid of all of it. And I don't know, it seems like a lot of those people tend to become a little bit nihilistic. And I could be wrong on this. I mean, it'd be great to have some conversations with people who
are
come out of that, who've kind of become atheistic.
Yeah.
And just, try to dig deep and see. So, but it was during this time that I kind of found Jordan Peterson, and the way he thinks about things and the way he teaches about them really morphed a kind of fundamentally how I view the scriptures. And we'll kind of get into this, but we'll kind of go into this, and it's a thing I like to call just meta truth as an overall idea. So, and Jordan talks about this mostly in his lectures on the psychological significance of the biblical stories,
which are on YouTube. Which are on YouTube. Check out. Yeah.
He goes through Genesis. Now, in these series of lectures, he introduces the idea of a kind of a psychological truth versus an actual physical historical truth. So, and he even says, not to say that 100% these things did not actually happen. And that's not what I'm saying either. But the morals of the story, right? What that means to us psychologically, philosophically, day-to-day life may actually be, and I actually believe this, may actually be more important than did it actually happen in history.
So the value is in what it teaches us. So it's where the value is, right? So the value isn't necessarily that these actually happened. The value is in they're teaching us something about ourselves, about about the human experience, about what we should do as opposed to what we feel like doing. These are the reason why the Bible is important. And you're right. They tend, and he uses this example, the wheat from the chaff, or the baby out with the bathwater. We tend to, as human beings, if we have bad religious upbringing, we're going to throw it all out, right?
Yeah.
This is why there's a heavy amount of not to disparage or put them in a box, but there's a heavy amount of people who are homosexual who grew up religious, and then rather than be told that they're evil because they have these feelings towards the same sex, they throw the entire religion out and they become atheistic, or they become like, I don't know, what's like spirit animal worshiper or whatever. And this is a generalization. Not everybody's like this. I mean, Barry Weiss, I follow Barry Weiss, and she's a religious Jewish gay woman. But she, she, what do you call it? She practices Passover and all those other things.
Yeah.
She's not a secular Jew. She actually does the religion. So,
well, and that's one of the reasons that I loved when Jordan Peterson opened with his biblical lectures. Was he's like, I'm not saying, definitively that these things did not happen in history, but that's not why I'm here. Yeah. This is the psychological significance of these stories, right? And so with that, and he talks about this a little. I think I want to say I gleaned this out of his biblical lectures, but the idea of a meta truth, right? So, and we're going to use, I'll kind of use Cain and Abel as an example, or maybe even Noah. But
his Cain and Abel lecture, by the way, did a 180 in my belief about that whole story.
Yeah,
because we were taught a certain way as polygamists, which we don't need to get into, and I'm not gonna throw them under the bus, because that story in particular has some very significant wrong thoughts in fundamentalist Mormonism. So we don't really need to get into that. But what I'm trying to say is that when his lecture on Cain and Abel, which is what, 2 sentences or 3, it's a paragraph long.
Yeah. In the Bible. Yeah.
In the Bible. So for everybody who doesn't remember this story, Cain is I believe the older brother, and he is jealous of Abel because they both make sacrifices to God, and Cain's is not looked upon as the right sacrifice, and Abel's is. Now, regardless of the sacrifice, they are he's jealous of it, and he decides to
Abel
murder.
Is blessed. So
Abel is blessed from his sacrifice.
He becomes this. There's this kind of this notion that Cain offered sacrifices as well as Abel, but Abel is blessed and Cain is not.
And then Cain becomes jealous, and then he murders Abel. It's essentially the first murder in the biblical story.
So the story goes that Abel is blessed, Cain is jealous of Abel, and I love the part where God talks to Cain and he says that your countenance has fallen and that evil lieth at the door. So basically, Cain was mad and upset that he wasn't being blessed like Abel, and he was going to go kill that. Now, Jordan will say he went and killed the ideal. There was something above him that he could work towards, but he went and killed it. Rather than,
this is the same thing that school shooters do. They become nihilistic.
He uses school shooters as an example.
He was the first school shooter. Essentially, he was nihilistic. He was looking. So if a school shooter goes to a school to wreak havoc on the innocent, right? On the ideal, because in our society, once you've gotten to a certain point and not achieved a certain amount, you're looked down upon, or at least some people would interpret that as being the bad thing in their life. So a school shooter, been made fun of all of his life, doesn't have anything to live for, really nihilistic, doesn't have a girlfriend, all that kind of stuff. They become jealous of the youth of or like the Sandy Hook school shooter killed elementary kids. So
Yeah.
he was jealous of the youth and the potential that they presented in their world, right?
Yeah.
And the psychological wheels are turning, and goes out and murders a bunch of innocent children. Now, I hope he's getting, raped by devils in hell for that. But the thing is you can understand his actions when you know the story of Cain and Abel. Because
I don't know about understand, but the idea is that there's a cut between every person's heart. Now, this gets to kind of a meta truth. If you take all these stories and
the Cain and Abel story,
the
let's
Cain and Abel
focus on
story it's possible that
it really happened.
These stories were talked about, and the story was taught, and it was gleaned over
centuries,
millennia.
Yeah,
where it was told by sages, tweaked a little bit because they learned something more, tweaked a little bit, and then written down. Now, does this mean that there was not an actual, in history, guy named Cain, guy named Abel, and one kills the other because he's jealous?
And the question is, does that matter?
I believe it matters less. It matters less in the sense that the story is teaching us something.
Yeah, it doesn't degrade
about
the value.
Humanity.
It doesn't degrade the value of the story just because those people maybe didn't exist. Right? So maybe there wasn't
central time and place.
You would think that the first murder in the world would be so significant that it would deserve to be told over and over and over and over again. Right. So I don't fall on either side. I find it interesting that there is two sides. So there's two sides. One side says these people really existed. There was really a murder, which would be a very significant thing in our history as human beings, right? Mm-hmm. And then the other side is, it doesn't matter if they did exist. That's not the point of the story. The point of the story is, if you have murderous intent, if you kill your ideal, you are banished from God.
And you allow your countenance to fall, and you
become nihilistic. You
kill your ideal.
You kill your ideal.
You have jealousy towards your brother who's done better than you.
Yes. And you kill the innocent. So this also happens in people, right? Inside. So there's two wars. Like who was it? Scholznissen that said that the line between every human heart, or one side,
there's a line between every human heart.
Yeah.
One is to be good or to be evil.
Yeah.
And so Viktor Frankl says something similar, where he says there's only two races in the world: the race of the humane and the race of the inhumane. And that kind of plays in Mormonism. Growing up, we were taught from the Book of Mormon. There's the beginning of the Book of Mormon, there is a section where it says that there are only two churches. There's the Church of the Humane and the Church of God and the Church of the Devil. Now, people have interpreted that up and down all over the place. I after reading Viktor Frankl, I think that Viktor Frankl and, you know, wherever Joseph Smith got it from, were on the same wavelength, in the sense that there's only two churches. There's the church of the devil and there's the church of God. There are only two races. There are the race of the humane, the good, and the race of the inhumane, the bad.
Yeah. Well, and in Joseph Smith's case and Mormonism in general, it's become we're the only church that is the right church. So, but what Viktor Frankl's talking about is,
but I think they missed the point on that.
Yeah, so, they missed the point on it, because what they're talking about is it's just the side of good, which is the side that believes in God and a higher being, and then there's side of evil, who's put all their faith in, you know, the evil of humankind, you know, like Nazis would have, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So
I feel like Christians will kind of get, it feels like a lot of times fundamentalist Christians want to die on this hill, which is that everything in the Bible actually happened, right?
Yes.
This is actual historical document.
Yeah.
That this Cain and Abel were two people, actually happened. Noah was an actual family that rode on an ark in the flood. Joe Rogan does have some really interesting episodes about with people that he had on about an actual flood. So there's a possibility that historically these things did happen, but that's not the point. And it doesn't take away, like you mentioned a second ago, it doesn't take away from the efficacy. I feel like it actually, that there's two schools of thought. You can think that it means more that it happened actually, historically, physically happened, or it means more that this is analogous of us, who we are, our demons working through who we are as people, and these are examples and morals and examples to try to better ourselves, to become like. So
well, and for me, I wasn't really that into learning about the Bible up until I started listening to Jordan Peterson's lectures. So, and then he presents this idea that if it's true and actually happened, or if it's meta true and it's meant to teach us something, doesn't matter. Doesn't matter, because if you're throwing it out, you're throwing it out, the baby out with the bathwater, right?
Yeah. But the idea of the meta truth, I'll try to stay on this a little bit, but the idea of the meta truth is that the story of Cain and Abel happens all the time.
Yeah.
Within our hearts.
Yes.
The story of Noah happens every economic crash. These stories are happening all the time. It's a gleaned truth that's pulled out of things that happen to us all the time. And
because jealousy is like one of the well, I wouldn't say it's the reason for murder, but it is one of the big reasons for murder, right?
Right.
So a jealous husband comes home, his wife's been carrying on with other men. He goes and grabs his shotgun and he kills both of them. That's murderous jealousy, and those stories have been happening. Shoot, you can read stuff about that happen in the Old West and beyond that.
Well, and it's also, and that's why I say I love the part where God says to Cain, "Your countenance has fallen. Be careful. Evil lieth at the door."
He's talking about nihilism. That's nihilism.
The nihilism.
So you can
the hatred.
Yeah, the hatred for humanity. The hatred for
Yep.
things of good. You know, there's no way that you can look at a little child and hate them unless you have let nihilism take over your heart.
That you've allowed that darkness to creep
Yes,
in and take over.
Yes.
Yeah.
And it's a very metaphysical thing that so if you look at mugshots of really bad people, that you can see the countenance fallen. Like, so
yeah.
He uses an example of in the 1920s of this guy whose entire life was horrible. Do you remember this? In his first book? He killed a bunch of people, and he was caught, and he was sentenced to, I think, Alcatraz. And he shows his mugshot in 12 Rules for Life. There's an illustration of the mugshot, and the guy is possessed by nihilism. He's had the worst life in the world, and he's perpetuated that through his life. Now, nowadays people are always like, everything bad has happened to me because of other things, right? I'm more impressed with the person that's had bad things happen to them and has risen out of it than I ever am impressed with the person who's given into it and just perpetuated the bad. Because you hear about these people all the time.
Joseph story.
Yeah,
is in our everyday life, people that we meet who came from horrible situations, from a horrible life, but chose to not curse God. That's also the Job story.
Oh yeah. They're all. But what if, in this meta truth, for example, and I'm not trying to shit over all the Christians out there, but what if God isn't a being up in the sky? What if he's just the greatest possible good? And Job,
and Jordan talks about it a lot.
And Job talks about that a lot.
Yeah.
But Job, if you take the Job story, it's like him fighting against becoming nihilistic.
Yeah.
Right. So he's not giving in to the nihilism. He loses a family. He's got what is there, plagues and stuff like that. His kids are dying. His wife is dying.
So for people who don't know, just real quick, bare bones of Job. There's a man that's very blessed and you could say loved by God, right? Many blessings, good life, right? And basically, and it's kind of an odd story, really, because you've got God or Satan comes to God and says, and they literally have a wager.
A game of chess.
Satan says, wait a minute, this person loves you. This Job guy, he loves you because of his blessings that you have given him. If you allow me to take all of his blessings, he would curse you. And
he become nihilistic.
And God's like, okay, go ahead, but you can't take his life. You can take everything from him, but you can't take his life. Go. And Satan unleashes on Job, and the story goes throughout, and it's long and drawn out, and he talks about, he sings praises to God throughout and things like that.
Death and pestilence. And this is also Viktor Frankl. So Viktor Frankl wrote The Man's Search for Meaning, and he's a psychologist who gets taken to Auschwitz in Nazi Germany, and he is terrorized because he's Jewish. And he realizes that the people who are making it through have something to live for, something outside of themselves to live for. When they give into the nihilism, that's when they die.
He noticed that his other inmates, basically, when they would give into the the hatred of everything, and he would see them,
or hopelessness. It was just like
hopelessness. Yep.
it can be best explained with the word nihilism. It's just a
He would see them
hopelessness that,
fall.
yes, and they wouldn't survive the winter or whatever, and because they're dealing with unimaginable suffering, right? And this is the story of Job. So did Job exist? So here go back to the meta. Did Job exist?
Go back to the meta truth, right?
Does it matter that he existed? It doesn't matter, because you're learning. The value is in the story. The value is in them telling the Bible telling us to not give in to the nihilism, because eventually something good is going to happen. So this is like, if you took God out of the story, which a lot of people like to do, but if you take God out of the story, it's just about a man dealing with the light, like the shit that life throws at you, right? Because life, there's not one person on earth who couldn't go, I have had something terrible happen, and regardless of whether that's like Jocko Willink famously said, when the Wi-Fi goes out in my house and it's the worst thing that's happened to my kids in a while, he's like, I'm doing my job pretty good, and I feel the same way, because like my oldest kid can't tell us what she wants for Christmas, because she's like, I don't know, I pretty much got what I want. And I'm like, I've done my job, because you got a good life. So and there's another aspect here that the Exodus seminar that we're watching presents is, do we know people truly if they've never been tested? Do we know their true behavior if they've never been tested? So Job goes through all of these, the shitstorm of basically two lives. He goes through two families.
Loses his family, loses everything.
Isn't it two families? Like he gets another family and then he loses them too, or something like that. Like they all die as well. It's something crazy like that.
I'm not sure. But also his friends come against him. They're like friends, all of his friends rally against him, or like, you must be a bad person because this is happening.
This is happening to you. Yeah.
Basically, they're like, and so he loses all of his friends, he loses all of his family, but he never curses God. And so you could see that as he never curses the ultimate good.
The ultimate good.
And he's rewarded for not cursing.
Eventually he's rewarded. And so was Viktor Frankl, if you think about it, because the war ended. Viktor Frankl got out of Germany. He got like, he wasn't rescued from Auschwitz. They just left. It wasn't Auschwitz. It was, if I remember correctly, it was another concentration camp that he went to, and the Germans just left, and they walked out of the gates, and they were walking around the countryside, and they're like, what the heck happened? They had found out that eventually they find out that the war ended, but Viktor Frankl eventually became very famous. He writes this best-selling book about his experience. So, but his wife died, his parents died in Nazi Germany, and so he's the exact Job story. He goes through all this suffering. He has meaning in his life because he wants to get this manuscript that he had been writing all of his life about the logos therapy out. So he's got this purpose, and that's what keeps him alive. And he talks about an inmate of his that had a daughter that he was trying to get to, that he knew was in Switzerland, and that keeps him alive. So one of the reasons that it's good for you to have a family is it keeps you motivated to continue on in what essentially is life. And it's hard. It's hard on everyone.
Well, and it's so there's, and we kind of mentioned that we're a little bit on the fence with some of the Mormonism stuff, but there's a moment where in the Doctrine and Covenants where Joseph Smith is complaining.
We should explain that Doctrine and Covenants is another Mormon text that
of
arguably is
revelations that happen that Joseph Smith and some of the prophets
arguably
had. Okay. So, but there's a moment there where he's complaining about the persecution that the saints, the Mormons, are going through. And God comes and reveals in this revelation, and his first response is, "Thou art not yet as Job." Right? And growing up, and like I said, there's a lot of falsehoods going on in the LDS church, but I grew up, and whenever I had trials, I always would think to myself this thought, "Thou art not yet as Job." Right? I am not on my deathbed from boils and sores. I have not lost all my friends. I have not, all of my family died. Right? I haven't, because Job gets to the point, basically his health is gone, his family, everything's taken from him, but he still doesn't curse God. And that's the point. Right?
Yeah.
And so I always thought, when I had trials, I'd be like, "That thou art not yet as Job," and it would calm, like it helped. So, kudos to that religious upbringing that had that part in it. But
yeah, but then okay, so you not to disparage any religions, but if we're looking at the Bible and going, there's great things to be learned from this, then can't we also look at the Book of Mormon and go, there are great things to learn from this? The Bible's older.
Possibly.
The Bible's been around longer, right?
Yeah.
There's questionable beliefs of whether Joseph Smith was actually seeing angels that were telling him how to translate this Bible, or this new Bible, essentially. But it doesn't matter if you glean something from it, if you've bettered yourself with it, doesn't matter.
One thing arguably, and this would be probably one of Jordan Peterson's arguments, is that because of how old the Bible is, and that the Western culture is basically built on the Bible, that it would hold more stock in the fact that this is kind of where we came from. So it's hard to say.
The Book of Mormon is just a ripoff of the Bible, more or less. For a good
very similar stuff. Yeah, there's some real similar stuff going on in the Bible and the Book of Mormon text. So that might be kind of interesting to
get
in the future, kind of dig deep in. I always thought it'd be kind of fun to do similar seminars. Not that I have any psychological or psychology background, but I thought it would be fun someday to do similar seminars, the psychological significance of the Book of Mormon. So, but maybe down the road someday. But so back to Metatruth.
So do your apples analogy, because I've heard this before, and it's very interesting.
I like to use an analogy of Metatruth by talking, like, let's say there's a teacher that has 4 apples, okay? And the teacher is teaching children that 2 + 2 = 4, right? And you can actually have 4 apples, right? Or you can learn the understanding of the math that 2 plus 2 equals 4. And the question here, and I think this is kind of the question being, in a sense, put forward by Jordan Peterson in his work, is which is more valuable? To actually have 4 apples. Now, back in the day when we were, hunter-gatherers, 4 apples would have been a lot of calories and worth probably its weight in gold, right? Might be the thing that keeps you from starving. 4 apples, right? But the knowledge, and I'm using 2 plus 2 as an example, like there are mathematical things that you can learn that help build bridges, right? So the analogy here is that learning from the
physical world,
learning from the 2 plus 2 equals 4, and I subject that learning that 2 plus 2 equals 4 is more valuable than actually there being 4 apples. And the actual being 4 apples is kind of the analogous to the idea that there was actually 2 guys named Cain and Abel, that there was actually a guy named Noah that built an ark and survived the flood, right? But gleaning out of those stories, there's a ethic, there's something to learn, like
the math.
And if we're being really honest, when you get into high-end math,
like physics and stuff,
there's no tangible thing, right? There's no tangible thing. You are learning a concept. There's concepts that when you solve for X, right? What the fuck is X? No one knows. It's just X. Solve for it. Right? So there's a
but it can be used in the physical world to build bridges, right? So the 2 plus 2. So I wouldn't say that there's more value in one or the other. I would say it depends on where you are at. So if you are a starving person, the physical apples are more important than the knowledge that you're going to learn 2 plus 2 equals 4, right?
But on a societal level,
not necessarily the hungry person,
the hungry one person
learning 2 plus 2 equals 4, which is the basis of mathematical, like this is what we learn at the very basic level. Like as children, we learn 2 plus 2 equals 4. 2 apples plus 2 other apples equals 4 apples. The knowledge of that would lead to you getting the math right for building a bridge, right? Becoming an engineer and building a bridge. So
building a society. So like
that is the Bible. The Bible essentially is this thing that has built our society, that has stories in it that may or may not have been true, but it doesn't matter, because the value that it has propagated in teaching us morals and getting us from the basic apes that we are to more thoughtful, the intelligent. So it goes back to the math which is, I would say they're equally important, right?
I would disagree. I would disagree. I actually think,
but if you're starving, then it's equally important, because that's what I'm going back to. Starving.
Yeah, sure, I guess. But I would say that
The
when it
meta truth is
comes
more
to the meta truth,
yeah,
there's an ethic that comes out of
the
the
Bible that's
stories.
more important than the
I
actual stories being
I believe
revealed.
those are more important, and that's why I always feel kind of sad that a lot of Christians will want to die on this hill,
Yeah,
uh, figuratively speaking, die on this hill of that every word in the Bible actually happened, right? God
yeah,
actually created the world in 6 days, right?
yeah.
Like these things actually happened, and that's what they want to die on. And
I
I think
don't.
that's kind of a disservice
I
to the ethic.
I'm inclined to agree with you, but when you use the apple analogy, if you're
Yeah.
starving, if you're it, your basic instincts kick in, and the apples are more
Well, and
important than the knowledge that you learn from them, right?
back to why I used a teacher analogy.
Yeah,
The
yeah,
the thought is that when you're a child, and this is why I teach my children that the Bible stories actually happened, because when you're a child,
it's better that you learn them as true, like they actually happened.
that they actually happened.
But maybe by the time they're our age, they're looking deeper into the stories than we were learning as children, because I mean, they've proven the frontal lobe doesn't fully develop until you're like 25. And so you and I are both over 25, and you and I are diving into this along with a man like Jordan Peterson, who's lived a lot longer than we have, is way more intelligent than we will ever be. So he's the teacher in this analogy, and he's teaching us, and we're still learning, but we've gone beyond the apples.
Yeah, yeah,
We
and it's
we're
hard for kids to do that. Kids can't. It,
Yeah,
it's a
unless they're highly
philosophy. It's a
intelligent, and like,
yeah. It's
geniuses
a
or whatever.
hard thing. It's a hard thing, I think, for children to
It's a
be
hard
able
thing
to
for
understand.
it's a hard thing for teenagers. I have a teenager, and I find myself struggling to convey these ideas that we are talking about without confusing the hell out of her.
Well, and maybe our audience is confused. And this, to be honest, audience, please let us know in the comments what you think about the analogy
The
of two
apples
plus two
analogy.
equals four, like the apples. If that's making sense, if the because and I'll be honest, I've actually talked to people, adults, about this idea of meta truth, and they don't get it. So it
Yeah.
might be a subset of people that only get it, that are Jordan Peterson fans, and maybe that's why they're Jordan Peterson fans, is because they get it, and people who don't get it just will never get it.
Yeah.
I don't know, but it
Well,
does.
there's a certain amount of I don't know, like mental uh acuity to maybe think this, because I find, listening to Jordan Peterson, that there are moments where I'm right on the cusp of not understanding what they're talking about. Like
Mhm.
I'm right there. And it feels like, and I could be completely off base on this, but it feels like I'm actually getting smarter because I'm on the cusp of understanding, not understanding them. Right.
Mhm.
There's only been a few of and sometimes the conversations just are so overwhelmingly complex that I can't get further and I can't get very much further. And it might be the
Yeah.
limitations of my own intelligence. That might be my
Mhm.
own intelligence limited. But I'm definitely smarter than I was 10 years ago. I'm
Mhm.
definitely smarter than I was 20 years ago. I
Yeah.
feel like I am, at least.
Yeah.
Now, whether or not other people can see that, it, it, I don't know if that matters. As long as you
Yeah.
are feeling that you're gaining something from this, and from the idea of the meta truth, you know,
You,
this
there's
could
let
get.
me touch on that. Let me touch on that because there's you said, it doesn't matter if anybody else really notices or cares. There is something to that, because if you think about it, one, a prophet's never, not saying that you're a prophet, but a prophet's never accepted it at home. There's many stories of where prophets were kicked out of their own home country. Noah, everybody disparaged the Noah for you're crazy, you're building this ark.
Mm-hmm.
So sometimes you're going to run into, when you're trying to move yourself in these higher modes of being, I guess, the higher elevated thinking, there are going to be times that people have you ever heard the study they did with apes with the bananas?
I'm not sure.
Not sure? Okay, I'll tell you. Okay, so strap in for a second, because so what they did is they threw all these apes in a room, and they've got bananas hanging up a rope or a ladder, so they can the apes can go up the ladder and get the bananas, right? Well, what they did is they took a fire hose, and whenever an ape would actually go up the ladder, they would spray all the apes. Just spray them all down. Okay. And then what would happen is they did that enough times that when an ape was climbing up the ladder, this is what they do. Sorry, they throw in another ape, a new ape that has never been sprayed by a hose. And that one ape would start climbing up the ladder to get to the bananas.
Mm-hmm.
All the other apes, they knew what were coming, and they would grab the ape, pull them
down. Huh, interesting.
So they're trying to go up. The new guy is trying to go up and he's like, oh, there's bananas. Let me go get the bananas. And everybody else is like, no, we don't want to get sprayed by water. Pull them down, right? And slowly they would put in a new ape, and they'd pull out an old ape. New, old, new, old. They did it. They would do it until there was no ape in there that was sprayed by water. But guess what? They would not allow any of them to go up to get the bananas.
Because it had been learned behavior from somebody else. It'd
been learned. So none of the apes in there have been sprayed by water, but all of them have
learned from the previous apes that
we don't go get the bananas.
We don't go get the bananas.
Nope. We don't go get the bananas. No one knows why.
Well, and in the Exodus, doesn't Prager say that the outlier is the one that brings about change? It's never.
Well, that'd be the idea of like the prophet. The outlier.
So the outlier is the person that people are telling to shut up who decides not to, right? And the only change
that would be the case. Yeah.
Well, the only change that happens in our society is from an outlier who everybody else is telling to shut up. So Steve Jobs, Steve Jobs there's a bunch of stories out there of him being an absolute asshole, which he was, but he was also genius, and he was always being told that they couldn't do something. So you remember the old iPod that had the wheel that you spin your finger around, and it would go up and down. That wheel mechanism he wanted, but I think I can't remember the details. But I did read the book about him after his death. But he wanted that mechanism, and nobody believed it could happen. Nobody believed that they can make it.
We can't do this. Yeah.
We can't do this. And they kept telling him, no, we can't do this. And there was another engineer who actually came up with it, but it was from his pushing that this engineer came up with it. So there's so the outlier, the person who's not the the non-contrarian or the contrarian. I think
Contrarian. Yeah.
non-contrarian is a double
Yeah.
meaning, but anyway, so the contrarian is the person who creates the change in society and furthers the society. That's what Dennis Prager was saying in the Exodus. He says that that there are all the ills of the world are sometimes can be attributed to the what do you call it, the contrarian or the outlier, like Hitler, but all of the good, but not all of the ills of the world can be contributed to them, but all of the good of the world can be attributed to an outlier, somebody who went against the grain. So basically, the forefathers of the country, the only reason that this country is what it is because it had these people who were being told don't do this, and they did it anyway, right? The contrarian, so Thomas Jefferson, Benjamin Franklin, and Adams and Washington, they're good men who are told by society don't do this, and they still do it, essentially. So that's the only way that you actually get change in society.
Yeah, is from the and that's what I would say was kind of the role of the prophets throughout the Old Testament.
The Old Testament, yeah,
is
because maybe
that they were the contrarians. They were the ones that were, and Jordan talks about this a little bit, but basically, usually what would happen is the people would stray from a ethic, the higher good. They would stray from God, right, or the law,
and the prophets would have to bring them back.
A prophet would have to come in and like course correct, and that was the whole thing. Is like, okay, guys, hey, no, we're going the wrong way here. We got to go this way, right? And so, and I mean, Seth Godin talks about this in his book Linchpin, and he says that a linchpin is somebody who sees that something's broken and has to work to fix it. And when I read that book and heard that, I was just like, that I think that's the same as a prophet. I would say a prophet's the same thing. So
I always have kind of a negative connotation with saying it as a prophet because of the Mormon,
probably because of our religious
church
upbringing.
Yeah,
right?
The Mormon church and the fundamentalist Mormon church, the polygamists, they believe that their leader of their church is a prophet and speaks directly to God, which, if you really think about it, is kind of asinine. Maybe the prophets of old did speak to God, but what if they were just having dreams? What if they were seeing the broken thing and fix it? What if they were just linchpins? What if they were seeing the broken thing and fixing it? What if and this comes back to meta.
God would that all men were prophets.
Yeah.
That's Moses. Quote, Moses said that. So what if
Moses was just a regular dude who didn't regular dude that the burning bush is just like maybe a meta representation of this idea he had of, well, what if I just get the Israelites out of Egypt? What if I just do everything I can? And then there's the miracles of the plagues. But I mean, I think most of them you could put a scientific twist on, right?
Sure, but this once again, this goes into that kind of age-old argument.
meta truth
did
or
this
truth.
actually happen?
Did this actually happen?
Right. Did the Red Sea really part, or did they just cross it?
And but does it? But I always go back to, does it matter if it actually happened?
The meta truth is, the question with meta truth is, does it matter so much that it historically actually happened, or does it matter more the story of Moses and and let's be honest here, the story of Exodus is one of the biggest stories that the Christians used for abolitionism, to get rid of modern day slavery.
Yeah.
And so if we had, atheists were much less common back in the late 1700s and the early 1800s. But if they were as common as they are now, probably there's a good chance
that we
may not have actually gotten rid of
slavery.
This is, we kind of skipped over this. We didn't get to it when we were talking about our Exodus, but
we may have to stick the landing here in a little bit, because we're at least an hour in at this point.
Oh, all right. Well,
so what were you going to say though?
I was going to talk about the Nuremberg trials. They talk about in Exodus, the first episode.
The first episode.
They bring up the Nuremberg trials in the fact that during the Nuremberg trials, the Nazis put on the defense that they had victors' rights. They had victors' rights, and they were just following orders. And there was a moment where it was many people were scared. There were lots of people
that they were going to get away with all of their atrocities.
That they were going to get away with this.
So we should explain what the Nuremberg trials are, because not everybody knows what those were. And those should be, I wish I knew more about them. But essentially the Nuremberg trials were trials of the leadership of the Nazi regime after the war. They put them on trial. They gave them trials to show that they were committing human atrocities, and it resulted in the writing of some documents through the UN, or what was the UN at the time.
The UN and then they had the Human Rights Coalition.
Yeah, where they basically said, if you are committing
Human Rights Constitution, I think that was the name of it.
Yeah. So it's basically
1948.
If you were committing atrocities, that the other countries of the world had the right to take you out if you were doing this. Now, I don't think it stopped it, right? Because there's countries in Africa that are
we still have slavery,
and we still have slavery.
All across.
We still have slavery in this country, but it's not accepted legally. It is against the law legally. Yeah. I'd encourage anybody to go read the Atlantic article by called oh crap, now I can't think of it. It's an Atlantic article about a man who grew up being raised by his parents as slave. That they had come from the Philippines. It's such a great article. I wish I had more to it.
Anyway, it was a slave that raised him.
Yeah, in the 70s. This was in the 70s. Geez. And they brought her over from the Philippines with them. They were a well-to-do Philippine family. She was a poor. And they brought, or there was a general who gave her to them, or something along those lines. And they brought her over, and it's basically a story of modern day slavery. And he was raised by her. So he was like 12 or 13 when he realized, who is this woman? Because he was going to school in the States, and he was like talking to other kids, and other kids were like, who's that? And he just knew her by her name. And eventually he realized, like, she's a slave.
She's a
She was
slave.
brought over to just raise your kids. I mean, it's an amazing story. The Atlantic published it, and it's called let me just look it up. You can say.
Anyway, the point that they're trying to make here in all these guys with Jordan Peterson are talking about with the Exodus is that it's not necessarily, we can't take it for granted that today we believe slavery to be wrong. It wasn't always the case. And the Nuremberg trials,
it wasn't
there was
always
a moment where what do we do here when we all know, like, intuitively
we all know what they did was wrong, what the Nazis did. We all know
that what they did was wrong, but how are we going to legally prosecute this when we don't have? And basically, that's right there. You're everybody's reaching for an ethic that's outside of us.
Yeah,
right.
That we haven't written down. Right. It's an ethic that we intuitively know in our heads that this was wrong, and we shouldn't have let it happen.
Yeah.
But nobody had ever written down, like, this is against the laws of nature, like, to torture people, to starve them, to
which
it basically brought about modern day what do you call it, human rights ethics, pretty much.
Well,
I found the article. It's by Alex Tizon, or Zon, because his last name is spelled Tizon. It was published a few years ago in the Atlantic. It's called My Family's Slave. She lived with us for 56 years. She raised me and my siblings without pay. I was 11, a typical American kid, before I realized who she was. That's the opener. You should check that out, Michael. It's a long article. It took me like 2 days to read it because it was so dang long. But anyway, so that is an example of modern day slavery that still goes on, but everybody knows it's wrong. Even in that article, he talks to his mother about it when he was a teenager. At some point, he confronts her, and his mother won't acknowledge the fact that she's a slave.
Yeah.
Like, she doesn't have papers, so they can't send her back. She's stuck illegally in the country because they kind of smuggled her in. And he's like, she's our slave. She's been our slave. Like, he eventually he eventually helps her become a member of the family because he had this connection with her, this poor woman who was essentially his family's slave. It's a fascinating article. But anyway,
we should probably try to bring this home. Wrap this up.
So essentially what we were trying to get at is Metatruth.
Trying to get at that the way Jordan Peterson thinks about, faith, religion, the Bible, has revolutionized just my thinking on looking at the Bible stories.
Yeah, mine too.
The way the West has been set up with these Bible stories, and
that it's not bad. We just need to put that out there. Either thought isn't wrong. I wouldn't say. I would say, if you believe that these stories are really, really true, or if you believe that they're meta true, there's still value in them, and we shouldn't be throwing them out of society because they have value of just learning to be better. And like you said, we still have slavery without the Bible, right? Slavery is still in our society if people didn't look at the Bible and go, and specifically the Exodus story, and go, this is wrong. We should not have one human being subjugating another human being.
Yeah. My point with bringing that up, though, really was that it's hard if with no Bible, with no higher ethic, without believing in a higher being, higher good. If you only believe in evolution, there is a case to be made for victor's justice, for slavery, for these things.
Yeah.
If
that's all you believe in as a moral compass.
And I could be wrong. You know, I can't remember who was debating. I think it was somebody debating Ben Shapiro that basically said that the reason I can't just pick you up and throw you off this stage is because we have things set up so that we have an ethic between a moral code between all of us, that if I did that, it would be wrong. And so we have an ethic together.
But where did we get that ethic?
But the thing is like, and I think this was kind of to Ben Shapiro's point, is that if we have a piece of paper that says it's okay, if we have something going on within the society that says that that's okay, then you can do that and it will be accepted. And so, to the point of
that still doesn't
the
make
guys
it right.
talking in Exodus, the guys talking in Exodus is that one of them says, he's like, well, what if that piece of paper changes?
Yeah.
We can't just go off of this piece of paper because, and it's great that we have the piece of paper now. After the Nuremberg trials, we had the setting up of the UN and the human rights constitution written. So that's good. But what if that human rights constitution
changes over time?
What if we change that down the road? Does
using
the
picking him up and throwing him off the stage, that if it says, oh, you can do that now because you're angry with that person, does that mean that it's okay?
Punch a Nazi. It's okay to punch a Nazi.
It's okay to punch a Nazi, I guess, nowadays.
So
anyway, I don't think we've answered anything, but we sure have a lot of questions.
Hopefully the audience can leave in the comments their thoughts on the meta truth, on the apples analogy, if that kind of
makes sense.
Talk to us about it.
We do have to
there's a better way.
We do have to stick the landing on this one. We're over time. So this is the closer that I'm working on. Keep reading, keep listening, keep watching, learn more. Have a good day.
Till next time, brother.